Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Eric Lawson, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at ericlawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Eric for this week's conversation.
Welcome to another edition of the All Out Leadership Podcast. We are in the letter N for next. We've looked at several reasons people are resistant to change, to embrace what's next. And today I'm going to conclude with this thought. For some, change brings just a fear of failure. And the truth is this, when you're learning something new, chances are you're going to fail. You're going to make mistakes. Most mistakes aren't fatal. You jump out of an airplane, forget your parachute. That one's probably fatal. But most mistakes aren't fatal. I like Robert Kiyosaki, author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, what he said about failure. He goes, I like Texans and their attitude about failure. And he's referencing the Alamo and its military failure in spite of just how courageous their stand was. But Texans, rather than holding their head in shame, they actually took their failure and turned it into a battle cry for future battles, and they would shout, "Remember the Alamo." And then they turned it into a very profitable tourist attraction. I like that about Texas, and I think that's the right attitude. Look, today's failures are stepping stones for tomorrow's success. Great leaders have a bunch of failures inside of their past in order to learn to fail forward. In fact, John Maxwell has a great book. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. It's Failing Forward. And it's really just how you take your mistakes and how you learn from them and how you continually fail forward. One constant in this world is going to continually be change. I like what Henry Kissinger said. For any student of history, change is the law of life. So change is what's going to move us from where we are to where we need to be. Change is going to move us from the negative circumstances that we're currently encountering to the positive ones that we want to see. Change is going to move us from where we are to God's best. But again, if you don't change and you are stuck in something you don't like, you really can't complain about it because you have the power to choose change. There was a native tribe in South America, and it had been dying prematurely for generations for unknown reasons. Finally, scientists discovered it was caused by a bite of an insect which lived in the walls of their adobe home. Now, they had several options and possibilities to fix the problem. Number one, they could destroy the insects with insecticide. Number two, they could destroy and rebuild their homes. Number three, they could move away to a safer area. They chose option number four, stay and do nothing at all. And they continue to die. And there's a lot of people like that. They have options, but they just choose to stay and this dead end job. They choose to stay and around my toxic friends. They just choose to stay in certain things and not make change. Look, quit complaining about what you allow. I ask my staff all the time because I'll get certain blah blah blah. What about that? And I go. And in dialogue, I'll find out, are they part of the problem? Did they make changes to change the problem? And often I'll just remind them, look, you can't complain about what you allow. If you tolerate it, you can't complain about it. So go deal with it. In the 1970s, there was a TV show, ABC Wide World of Sports. And as a kid, I loved watching the ABC's Wide World of Sports. And one of my favorite things was the introduction. It's very, very classic introduction. And then there's this scene where it's spanning the globe to bring you constant variety of sport, the thrill of victory, and the agony of defeat. And when they got to the scene where it was agony of defeat, they showed this downhill skier veering off the ski slope and in this epic crash. Like, you're just like, oh man, did that guy even live? But the truth was he actually did just walk away with nothing more than really a headache. But actually, it was an intentional crash, and here's what happens. The guy was going down the really big ski slope where you'd make that really high, far jump. Well, what happened was the ice was so slick, he started getting so much speed that he was over going to shoot his landing, and he would have landed where it would have killed him. And so he made a split-second decision. Rather than landing too far and dying, he goes, I'm just going to take my chances with a short-term failure than a long-term death. And so he made a sudden pivot. And there's just times in life you just got to be able to okay with some short-term failures, short-term mistakes. Hey, we tried that. It didn't work. It's okay. I've never fired anybody at Element Church because we tried something new and it didn't work. The key is you just have calculated risks. You were strategic in your plans as long as you did your homework, did your research, crossed your T's, dotted your I's. Great. It didn't work. So we don't have to keep doing it. And we just learn from it and move forward. And that's okay. But the organization who penalizes failure, fires everybody because they made a mistake, you're hurting yourself and you're firing great talent. There was a large company, and this gentleman had made a massive mistake. And the gentleman was called into the CEO's office, and he was expecting to get fired. And the gentleman called him in, and so the man's standing there expecting to get fired, and he just says, "Hey, I want to congratulate you." And the man's like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, I want to congratulate you. You made a decision, and it failed, but you tried. Don't ever make the same mistake again." And the guy walked out. Well, one of the man's right-hand people said, "Man, why didn't you fire him?" He goes, "Why would I fire the guy? We just spent millions of dollars giving him an education. Why would I let some other organization hire it when I just paid for his education?" I go, "Oh, I like that. That's a great way to look at things." Genesis chapter 19, verse 26 tells the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot escaping, and Lot's wife disobeyed the angels of the Lord command to not look back. Now, biblically, the way this is written, it wasn't like she just glanced back over her shoulder. She actually turned, and the way it's written inside of the Hebrew is she turned with a longing inside of her heart. In other words, she missed Sodom and Gomorrah. There was a longing there. But what happened was, the Bible says she turned into a pillar of salt. The historian Josephus actually claimed in his writings almost 2,000 years ago that he actually saw this particular pillar of salt that was once Lot's wife. But the point is this: when you stop and you turn to long and look back for the way it used to be, and this is how we always did it, progress stops and stands stills. And you're not really going to be good for anything and anyone, just like Lot's wife. All right, look forward to seeing you next week as we continue next.
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out farther. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at ericlawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Eric will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.